you all know, this is James Walsh. Jim Walsh, can I call him Jim? We all know him as Jim. We know and love Jim. This is our second solo exhibition of Jim's paintings of Berry Campbell. Jim has been in every show, every group show we've had at this gallery from the beginning. We love Jim's work. There's nobody that works like Jim, as you can see. He's got every angle going on, and the more you look at these, the more you can see that. We are grateful to Jim. He is like the best team player. He is knows what's happening in the art world. He knows what's happening in our world. We know what's going on in his world, and he gives a great history, and I'm sure you'll talk about this too. Jim knows a lot of artists that you also know their names in their artwork, and these are some of his influences, and I'll let him talk about that. Jim is from New Jersey originally, got his BFA at Rutgers University, MFA at Syracuse University. He's exhibited widely around the world, the United States, Canada, and England. He's shown at Flowers Gallery in London in a solo exhibition. Also shown at the Mendel Gallery in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is a fabulous museum, new building in Canada. He's been in numerous group shows and museums at the Everson, Newark Museum, Portland Museum in Oregon, all over the place. He's a great history, and recently this exhibition was reviewed by Piri Halal's. She points out a favorite painting called Flint Sky, so I will let you find that one because it's one of my favorites too. Also, Noah Becker for White Hot Magazine, this great new young writer wrote about Jim's work, and we're glad to have some new words and new perspective. Her name is Corrine Hutchinson. Corey Hutchinson, and we were just thrilled to get that review, and grateful to Noah Becker. So I will leave it to you, Jim. Everybody, I want everybody to ask questions. I can tell you this, Martha and I will say that we are fortunate to be with these paintings all day long. People ask us a lot of questions. How? What? Can this be? Is this only made out of? So I know you're going to ask those. I know you're going to answer those, maybe. Maybe not. You guys can keep trying. But feel free to ask questions, and I'm sure I'm going to ask a few too. So I turn it over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Christine. And thanks to everybody else, Martha, and to Elizabeth, and Chris, and Bob. And I must say, what a handsome group of people. Unbelievable. Just for some context, by the time I was in high school, I didn't think I was going to apply to college to be a painter. I was in the art room a lot because I was released from algebra early for the benefit of the rest of the class and other classes. So I would go to the art room where I was beginning to learn about ceramics. And there was a local craft store that had a school, and I went and took some classes and then became friends with that teacher. This is all in New Jersey, about 30 miles away. And kind of really got immersed in ceramics and ceramic technology and the wedging of clay, which has some relation, I think, and just the stuffness of clay. So by the time I'm ready to go and apply to college, I really wasn't thinking about painting. I went to the branch of Rutgers, which was Livingston College, because they had a salt glaze kiln, they had a raku kiln, they were going to build other kilns, and the place was kind of a wreck. It was on the grounds of the old Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, so you could tear buildings down if you needed wood, and just, instead of going to the lumber store. So after about a year of really being immersed in ceramics there, in some way I segued more so into painting, and was fortunate that not the painting professors there, but the drawing professors, the sculpture teacher, Mel Edwards, if folks know Mel's work, the silkscreen professor, were able to guide me in kind of the realms of painting that I finally landed in. Not to be unkind, but Leon Golub was the painting professor there, and I think Leon's a pretty good painter, but as far as what I was doing in abstraction in general, he couldn't, tell you anything. So I was going around to see all these other folks with my work that were teachers there. And at one fateful and well-timed showing of my work to the silkscreen professor, he said, "Oh, you need to go up to Nobler Gallery and look at Larry Poons." Now, I knew Larry Poons from dot paintings, because I looked in Art Forum at the library at the school, and I maybe had seen one somewhere, because in those days, you'd go to Soho and 57th Street, Madison Avenue, and you were done. It was great, like one Saturday, and you'd go back home. So maybe I had seen one. I had not seen what he was preparing me for, which was maybe a 73 or 74 show at Nobler of Larry, which is what we call today the throw paintings. So that kind of moment, had I not seen Steve Procunio that day and showed him my work, I maybe would have missed that, and we wouldn't be here today, because that really was a pivotal switch for me in that regard, because it kind of opened a world of what was possible and what was really going on. Because to date, I visited, at that point, 420 West Broadway, which had Castelli and Emmerich and Sonnabend and Weber, and that was kind of my focus. It was just, there was a lot of difference, but it was, again, comprehensible, not like today, where you never get to see all the galleries in a week if you were to travel along. So at that point, I really kind of pushed the ceramics aside for the moment, get heavily involved in the painting. In those days, you had a material that some folks will be familiar with called Roplex, which was a liquid acrylic that you could buy in bulk, so that would be a way to extend the paint, so you'd have a lot more paint, because something told us all we should have more paint. And at a certain point, I had the idea in my head that I had to go to Cranbrook when I was graduating. I said, I will go to Cranbrook, and I will apply as a painter and a ceramist. And they didn't let you do that. And I kept exchanging letters, and they said, you can't do that. And I did that, and I was, of course, rejected. Consequently, I spent a couple of years cooking at a restaurant in New Jersey. I had not, I must confess, cooked really anything before I could make peanut butter jelly. But they taught me how to cook there, and I did it, and it was okay. People ate, they were fine. I had a studio that I in a garage somewhere out there, and continued to paint. And then, fatefully, again, it might not have happened if I had stayed at a red light too long. There was a magazine, the Craft Horizons magazine, that featured ceramic work by artists who I'd come to respect by traveling around in New York. And this ceramic program up at Syracuse University, called the Syracuse Clay Institute, was kind of an atelier for folks who did not have a background in the technical requirements of clay. So I think the photo in the issue was like a Tony Caro sculpture. And that sort of just blew my mind. So fortunately, the timing was that I could apply to go there to land in the fall of '78. I was accepted as a painter and did a lot of work at the Clay Institute, of which folks who were working there at the time was Tony Caro, his wife Sheila Gerling, Ken Nolan was working there, lots of other folks. It's where I met Annie, who is here, who had been already at Syracuse, and she kind of knew the scene up there and helped me blend in somewhat. So the ceramic thing and the painting overlay began to make a lot of sense from all the technical background that I had accumulated, from high school on. So I knew how to run kilns and do all this stuff and mix clay and get everything ready. And it was a great experience. I mean, that was a moment in time, I have to say, at Syracuse University, when the visiting artist program and that program, you can't reproduce those things or imagine that you can construct them. They happen organically in that respect. So Annie and I moved to New York in 1980. We only vacated after almost 40 years last May, and now we're upstate New York. We are not New Yorkers anymore. But on our way out the door, we went up to Emma Lake Workshop, which is north of Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. And it was a workshop, doesn't really happen anymore, but it was historically a very focal point for all of Western Canada and most of Canada. And lots of Americans went up there. John Cage, I think, had been up there. Frank Stella had been up there. Jules Zalitsky had been there. Lots of people had come for 2 weeks in the summer, watching out for bear, fending off the black fly, hoping to see the northern lights, to have a kind of a small immersion in painting and to a lesser extent sculpture. So that I mentioned by way of our transiting out of Syracuse to arrive in New York, because it was pivotal. It's about 50% of the people I know today came out of that 2-week period, all of Western Canada. And as we were living in New York, Tony Caro, who had actually sent us to Emma Lake as a kind of a payment in effect for having helped him with the bronze workshop he did at Syracuse, because he loved his stay up there so much he thought it'd be great for us to go. So we drove all the way, the many thousands of miles there and back. And Tony came back to the States at a certain point and decided that he wanted to try to replicate some of that enthusiasm and immersion north of New York City, to kind of be an Emma Lake closer to all of us here. So that was the inception of the Triangle Workshop. So that's kind of the other 50% of people I know. It's from that first year at Triangle. Not literally. I'm just saying that for effect. So in the February of '82, we got into a rent-a-wreck Cadillac with Tony, his wife, and there was another car with Robert Loder, his sort of partner in crime on this venture, and we went up to look at these barns. And again, worth mentioning because you really don't know that these things are going to be as important as they are until they happen, and then some years later you reflect back on them. Triangle goes on till this day, does it, Willard? In some way, shape, or form. Not up there anymore. But it's in Brooklyn, and it kind of has gone into its 21st century mode, therefore. So anyway, those are two nodes of importance to recollect for me about how we got here today. I've been fortunate, again, knowing a lot of folks that Christine alluded to from the senior generation who, were friends with Annie and me, and of them, Ken Nolan and Jules Zalitsky and Larry Boones and Dan Christensen, where are you? That was, for our purposes as younger artists, another immeasurable boon. We were able to be in a milieu of folks who, for whom art was their lives, and just kind of compare your how you're going to manifest your future with them, or for yourself, rather, not with them. So, around about 1982, after there was a recession, and I had an art moving business for a few years, and sculpture restoration, and there was a recession that kind of caught up with the art world a little later, and I sold my truck, and I was kind of sitting, brooding, and luckily, Mark Golden of Golden Artist Colors decided that he wanted to get a couple of people out on the road to begin to widen that company. And since we knew him from about 1981, in the days he would deliver paint by hand in a box, hopping out of his truck and coming into your house and drinking your Diet Pepsi. And we knew the materials. So consequently, I went up. Annie was invited to do this too. She declined. She didn't come up. But I then learned more than I already knew, and for 25 years was out kind of standing in front of people like this, but not talking about me, talking about paint technology. So I'm sort of inevitably stuck, no pun intended, in the use of paint in that way that I was able to deduce from all those years of kind of being just behind the front lines of what a real functioning paint lab was doing. So there are paintings here, and I understand that many folks who have visited are curious as to what really is underneath them, and what are they made of, and you know what. They're not paint, are they? And in fact, they are all paint. They are really all paint that anybody can just go down to one of the retailers and buy all their paint and use. They are just, because the paint technology of today is advanced to the point where it accepts all of this kind of aggression or maximalism or whatever you call it. So technically, things often have to dry really slowly. It's just like ceramics in a way. If anybody has done anything with clay, they know you don't just make a clay piece and leave it out and keep it covered, you dry it slowly. If you let the acrylics dry too fast, well, lots of things can kind of begin to crawl and craze, and they do require a somewhat literal watching paint dry, long-term kind of session. You know, you just don't kind of paint them and go on to the next one. So a lot of my time is just spent, again, brooding over them and looking at them and because the nature of the acrylic beast is that there is a change in tonality from the wet state to the dry. You know, one is fortunate if you can know these things aforethought. So fortunately, I've been around them enough to not be too surprised by that sort of technical issue that people have to examine or immerse themselves in. So, you know, there's no plaster, there's no canvas stuck underneath, there's nothing else but just paint out of a bucket. So when I work, I have to have a lot of paint around. There has to be buckets. I'm not like mixing typically as I go. I pre-mix things. In a sense, the scale of what the work is like today is because the reach is such that if I'm working and, you know, they're flat on a surface, they're flat on a table now, and I'm moving things around, and if I were to triple them or quadruple them in size, which I've tried, I find that it's kind of it's like a false start. It looks as if I'm just trying to enlarge them. So I made plenty of big paintings over the years in the past. These are not those. You know, the way that they protrude and intrude into your world confines them somewhat. So that accounts for the scale, if anybody was worried. And some of them, you know, they're quite lightweight. It depends on which materials you use. There are materials that are available. Again, these are all stocked in the store shelves. If Mark Golden were here, you could all assault him and say, please, Mark, you know, where can we get a product like this? And again, pre-mixing color for the purpose of laying them out. There is often a value shift, really, of a light, milky quality that if you've held up acrylic medium, you see it. It's opaque, milky stuff. It dries in a transparent way. So I hope that settles the burning question of what else is under these. Once, a long time ago, I tried to bunch up some canvas and put it underneath. And it just looked like bunched up canvas put underneath. It wasn't a thing that I could really do. You know, that's how they work in that respect. And of course, the acrylics are incredibly forgiving materials that allow for a balance between matte and gloss without a lot of concern, as you might have with oil, where we still hope that folks know what fat over lean means, because an oil painting really is happiest when it's a thin film, an integrated film, which these are not. These are like fat films that are, I see people using oil like this, it's okay. Cracking happens on the sheerest of oil surfaces, depending on a lot of conditions. So, this is something that, were I to do this in oil, I would not expect them to last very long. So, this creature is really directly stealing a shape that Annie has been working on for a long time. These rectangular pieces that she's been doing, and I kind of, did what you do, you just steal, and began to, apply paint on them. So there are some number of them. They're not like hundreds or dozens, but there they are, doing what they do. So small pieces that are in the back. I mean, at some moment we can kind of squeeze into the next room if you would like. But some of the pieces in the back are not at all egregiously textured or egregiously surfacey. They are very small, in particular a couple of those small panel pieces, which, are kind of my take on a couple of favorite paintings, one of which was at the Met and I believe has been removed for now by Joachim Uttavel. It's called The Golden Age, and it's like an incredibly rich, tiny painting. And there's another one similarly untextured, which is in a way from Adam Elsheimer, who would paint on copper with oil in the 16th century. Dies in 16th century. So, it's not all about thickness for me. I mean, it is mostly. So,
let's go to the other room.
Sure. We'll slowly work our way. I had planned on starting out by saying, I'm an aspiring cave painter. Because, of course, cave paintings are absolutely terrific. That field of perception that cave painters used, however they lit these things to work on them, accounted for whatever changes were in the rocks, and they utilized them, and they did what they do. I've only been in 2 caves in my life, one of which was in Ireland, which was a bear cave. There were no drawings or paintings or anything. When you go in a cave like that, it's on a tour. They take you in, they leave you in the back, and they turn out the lights. And it is not like anything, it's like you're in outer space without the stars. It's like super black. Absolutely inky, you can't see anything. As to influence, I just like talking about the cave painters. It's great stuff to look at. I mean, it's just super, when you look at these images that they were able to produce. So, here we are. People are concerned about some of this glossy stuff. Again, these are just out of the jar, out of the bottle. It's just kind of knowing how to humidify them. I do use, sometimes there's a spray gun that's HVLP, which is a high volume, low pressure gun that doesn't put a lot of material into the air. And, I've used that in some of them, just a couple, so that accounts for some of the overspray that you see. And it is really just, again, an issue of kind of brooding over them and not rushing things to eliminate some of the shrinkage that acrylics are prone to doing from time to time. A lot lot of spray on that one, oddly. There's a lot of HVLP action in this one over here as well. That black circuitous thing, ropiness. So,
Jim,
yes.
it looks like you're always aware of some kind of a tool being used.
Yes.
To squeeze you
Yeah.
or a board.
Yeah.
And it'd be fun to hear about some of those. But my question is, coming out of your play background,
Mhm.
can you keep your hands off it?
Yeah, I mean, I use gloves all the time. I don't like touching it. It's not, it doesn't smell good. It doesn't feel good. It's cold liquids. You just want to keep clean. I don't like adulterating colors. I like to keep the colors kind of clean. With clay, I mean, there's a kind of a mystique about the touch of clay and all that, and it's like, yeah, it's there. It certainly isn't there with paint. And yes, as far as the tools, it's almost anything. It could be a board, it could be a piece of cardboard. If brushes are involved, they're usually these big wallpaper brushes, and if you don't clean them right away, they become encrusted and unusable. So it's laying stuff out, pouring it, tipping it around, seeing just how the gravity is going to affect things. The painting that Christine had mentioned, which is at the rear of everybody, called Flint Sky. There's everything from a kind of a gesso surface with a light scumble of a charcoal to the other paints. And that's a big tool. I probably don't remember what it was because I tend to forget a lot of the time. And really, for me, the worst thing to do is try to replicate something. Like if I love this painting, I say, I got to do another dozen of those. It just doesn't work. They are, for me, kind of one-off experiences, which is not always that great. It's like, let's make a dozen. And it doesn't happen. They look kind of forced.
Full disclosure, I also work for Golden, so I'm a product of Farmer Mark.
Okay.
One of the things I noticed is you don't have any crazing. Are you using like something like GAC or something like that?
Well, there's a lot of that. There's everything.
Okay.
And what you're referring to are various liquid mediums, which people call that. I never liked that word. I would always call them GAC.
Oh, sorry. GAC.
And they're numerical, 100, 200, 700. Where's Mark going? And they have different qualities. They're what we loosely use the term resins. I mean, resin is kind of a bandied about term. Resins have specific meanings: natural resins, synthetic resins. Acrylic mediums are in a synthetic resin family, but I go on. But yes, some or all that stuff is in many or none. I mean, I just have the stuff there. Some of it is mixed up. Not everything is mixed up. Depends on like the day of the week. But whatever's within reach sometimes.
Two-part question.
Sure.
Assuming, from what you've said, these are intuitively...
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't mention improvisation or any of that, but yes.
Was implied. Okay, so therefore, if you say you have your colors pre-mixed,
Mm-hmm.
does that contribute a sort of premeditation to that, then extemporaneous?
Yeah,
process?
sure. I mean, there are a lot of colors. I have many colors in buckets pre-mixed. And it's just like having many tubes of paint that you squeeze out. So if there aren't enough buckets, then more have to get made, because that's the kind of insurance policy. That I don't want to start with a couple of colors and then, start weeping and gnashing my teeth. I want to have an abundance of stuff to work out of, to work myself out of the corner or into the corner, depending, what day it is.
Can you talk more about color? This is so much about color, as the Great Foods reminded me, not just about the sculptural qualities, but it's about the color.
Yeah.
Always, what inspires you with color?
I would say that through like the 80s and 90s, there was a fair old suppression of color. But they were also often very much one-shot attempts. There is much cheating here. I have gone back in and worked on them over and over again in a way that I don't want you to see. But it was paintings from that previous era, which were larger paintings. They weren't as agglomerated. They were kind of one-shot painting. It sort of reflected the way my life was. I mean, both of us, Annie and I, both worked full-time jobs from the time we hit New York until just a couple of years ago. So I would get in, I would kind of ruminate, brood, and have everything ready and act. And, you know, that is not how it is now. Now there's ruminate, brood, work, eat, come back days later, and kind of rework them. So for the most part, just about everything here, I think, is been worked on over the period of some number of weeks at least, which is way different. So the color, there was a suppression of a lot of color back in those days. It was also maybe a little bit of what was in the air, in a way, for me, or for, excuse me, other folks. But not now. It's a little bit more like, hey, let's go all in, you know. I mean, that's not got a lot of color. It's got a couple of colors. So nothing that I say can be taken with any degree of you know.
But did you know you were going to, I mean, did you think, I'm going to do a painting? I mean...
you know, I had the colors made. It wasn't like I made them to make that painting. They were colors that were made. And, you know, they start off again on a canvas stretched onto plywood where it is gessoed. One thing as soon as I started working for Golden, I started gessoing everything. So 3 coats of gesso. So, why? Well, because canvas is an industrial material that lasts about 100 years under some conditions. Not in museum vaults, but out in the world. And linen lasts longer for oil painters' purposes, and polyester canvas, which is kind of god-awful to paint on, lasts longer. It is imagined. But I just got into a thing like, oh, I'm talking about paint in front of people, I better start gessoing, so that's what I did. And it's okay, you know, because you can sand it or you can make smooth it and do things, and it's not all cotton duck coming through all the time. So,
yeah, Jim, when you begin,
yes.
when you're painting behind the yellow painting, you see a lot of thin stains, stripes, and stuff. How long is it before you start adding texture into the painting?
Like immediately. Like what I had started saying, so I would gesso these canvases. They're wrapped around, stapled around a plywood already, 3/4 ply, so I can kind of move it around. And then I stain them, whatever, any color, all colors. It might not be one color, it might be a couple of colors. And that's just the thing to bounce off of. So some indistinct decisions are made until the final thing. And you know, it's like knowing when to stop is a job of the abstract painter. You know, knowing when you're there, or am I there, or coming in later in the week and saying, oh, that is a painting. You know, that's really the thing. So, you know, I couldn't even tell you what the steps were.
Yeah.
Again, to try to remake this or any of the others, it's like, forget it, I can't do it. You know. Yes.
Do you, just taking that piece, would you ever come in, look at it, and say, I don't like this large glob at the bottom, and can you remove it or not?
I thought about that. That's a lot of work. And, you know, it's such that, you know, I have like big paint globs from the inside of buckets, and they're in a bigger bucket.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make a big painting. And people have done so. I mean, people take big, you know, I had a gallon of iridescent pearl, and I realized when we were moving, oh, it had a crack in it, and half of it was just a solid lump. So I haven't. I could. I'd have to figure out what saw to use that you wouldn't wreck the saw, because I don't like wrecking tools. You know, maybe the Japanese saw. I don't know.
Right.
I haven't done that. You might do that. Or I run over and do that. Yes.
I noticed you stay pretty much within the rectangle.
Yeah.
Now, can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's, we're bound by the rectangle, not everybody. But I am plagued somewhat by that because, that's kind of architecture. The rectangle is wired for all of us. We know what art is. It's a rectangle. I mean, obviously we go places, we see art that isn't a rectangle, even over the last hundreds of years. But we are awash in rectangles. It's like a convention that is 20 years ago when painting was dead, and then now it's sort of walking dead, or it's back, because it was. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, the dominance of casual ideas in the art world was that, there's really no painting, painting's not. I simplify this. But, painting has kind of come back and infiltrated in a way back into the parlance that it's not as offensive to folks who held those ideas. But yes, they are rectangles, and I do think about it, but I just continue to make rectangles. I'm not really disposed to go out, as many people do, terrific things that are not rectangles.
Because they're so organic, the rectangle confines it and makes it feel more energetic, in a sense.
Well, I like hearing that. It's such that it does do the job that the rectangle does. It's imprinted in everybody's mind. We all know that there are rectangles and they contain art, and that we keep endlessly dividing and reorganizing the rectangle to the end of time. So that's our job somehow as artists. But I'm not wedded to the idea that the rectangle is the be-all and end-all, if I'm making any sense about that. I mean, I'm just not doing that. But I see plenty of unrectangular work that is terrific, and great. So there you go.
How many do you work on at one time?
Probably about 4 or 5 at once. And then, again, it's this drying thing, and then some of them will get cleaved off and, again, reworked to the extent that I will not tell you. Yeah, I don't really want to work on one thing. It's like I don't want all that focus right in there.
Well, like one's drying, so you don't want to sit around and do nothing for the next 4 days.
Well, usually I'll start them all kind of at the same time, and then some of them will spin off and not be viable. I don't believe you can make good paintings without making bad ones. I think if there is any dictum, that is it. If you accept the dictum that in art there are no rules, the other dictum would be that, if you're making work and you think everything you do is great, there's probably something a little bit wrong. That means you're not on the edge to fail. Failure is kind of built in. You should fail sometimes, not all the time. You should try.
Was there a pivotal point in your development here that affected your application of color and was there anybody or any particular, aside from just like, oh, I have a lot of colors now?
I think I have a lot of colors now. The color less so than the material aspects themselves. I mean, these are not materials exclusive to me. Like I said, you could go and get all this stuff. And there are folks who predate my use of it, and they did it in the way that they did. I'm just trying to carve out, no pun intended, my little, corner of moving stuff around and trying to surprise myself. So as far as the color, there's so much to look at in so many places that I don't really think about being influenced. I don't think in color. Via color, I know that I was influenced in terms of the materiality. Not Dubuffet or Fautrier or any of those guys, But folks who came later in the 60s, you know, Litsky and Clunes and folks like that, I mean, I have no, you know, license. That was not granted by those before me in some respects, as far as that's concerned. But the color, I mean, there's a painting up front that Peary Hollis in her piece mentioned, that's like the piano lesson. Matisse, and I'm like, oh, okay. Whether that was embedded in my head or not, I don't know. I just, you know, just she noticed that, and I said, oh, I can accept that. I didn't put up a fuss. But mostly I don't think that does happen. People don't casually see, oh, there's, you know, yet another Roth or something like that. It's not like, you know, it's not that. So, yes.
I'm just fixated with that blue there.
The
And
blue.
thinking about, I mean, it's a really specific blue.
Yes.
My estimation. Are you randomly mixing that color up and that's going to be among your buckets because you just love that color?
Yes. Yeah.
Have you arrived at that after just loving so many different kinds of blues?
I do like blue. So there's often a lot of blue around. Although we didn't manage to get a lot of blue into the show. There's more blue sitting in the studio, for example. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to be without, that's ultramarine. I don't want to be without that. It's just like, you know, you got to have it. In other colors that I favor, that are around somewhere, you know, chrome ox, green. There's always some around. So it is to that end, I guess, just the favorites.
You know what?
Does that mean I should have someone make them that are not my favorite colors? That is behind your assertion.
No, you know
no,
what?
I mean, you're not challenging it. I'm just saying.
No, it's my ignorance just came forth because I didn't think that was ultramarine.
Yes,
I thought
it is.
that was a very specifically going.
It's ultramarine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I take it all back.
Okay.
There's a few non-painters in everyone.
Yes.
Do you ever go back and scrutinize your older paintings, and are you ever really truly satisfied with a painting of yours?
Yeah, I do, and am. You know, there are a fair amount of stored paintings, some of which are stored in plastic so you can see them, some of which are not. They're like wrapped up in the white stuff now, or they're in a cardboard thing. And especially in the course of the fact that we moved out of New York and had a look at almost everything, I was pleased, satisfied, one of those, that work from like the 80s held up. I was okay with that. So there's, you know, lots of different kinds of work, it's all abstract painting, but
just one though, just one.
No, not just one. I mean, there were a lot of them. It was more than one. It was good. It was good. Yeah. I mean, should there be some of them again that are bad paintings that should be expunged? There probably are, and will be by time or need. But yeah. So if I were to drag out paintings from mid-80s, mid-90s, I could find stuff that I really, really like, and was surprised to have not seen it for 10 or 15 years, like how it held up. You know, at least I mean. So. Yes.
Well, blue color. The Klein blue is kind of a copy protected, something like that. Klein blue, you know, Klein blue, right?
Klein, East Klein.
Yeah.
Klein. Eve Klein or Franz
Yeah.
Klein?
East Klein.
Which Klein? Franz?
Oh, France, yeah.
Franz.
Yeah. That's blue color, it's a kind of registered kind.
You mean, am I paying attention much
Yeah,
to
so
Franz Klein?
that's very similar, but same, but
Eve Klein
yeah,
blue.
the French.
Eve Klein blue, which is
So that color is kind of copyright, something
yes,
like that. So no one
yes,
can
like Vanta Black, the
yeah.
black that only Anish Kapoor can use. This is sorry. I don't know. Is that? I thought that was a phthalo color. The where'd he go? He's gone. Mark is gone. The Yves Klein glue, I don't know that that one is actually copyrighted. The material that the polyvinyl acetate that they used to keep it that matte, I think that's something that's proprietary. I don't know.
Yes, very unique.
I mean, I like them. I like some Kleins, funny sponges, all gold. I like that. That's okay.
Well, I invite everybody to ask Jim more questions. Have a look at these small ones in the back. They're amazing. They give away a lot of secrets that we've been talking about. And there's water and wine. Let's celebrate.